Well, I am really excited to introduce Dr. Ben Merkle to you. He is our college president. He received a doctorate at the University of Oxford, and he also teaches a freshman lordship, which I think some of you got to sit in on. Did anybody get to sit in on that class? That's here. Awesome. On top of running the college and teaching a class here and there, he and his wife host a weekly soup night, which is a favorite among the freshmen when we're not quarantined, of course. And so I'm really excited to introduce Ben Merkle on introducing the college.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Oh, somebody's asking about the beard. Yes, the beard got shaved between now and I think when I lectured to you all. That was, yeah. My wife can only handle it for so long. So I knew sooner or later it wasn't going to last that long. Anyhow, yeah. So the beard is gone, and this is me with a smooth face. I am here to introduce the school to you, which is kind of funny because this is at the very end of the Prospective Student Weekend, but it actually, I think, fits really nicely here as a way of kind of wrapping things up and maybe giving me a chance to point out things that you might have missed not being on location. Normally, when we have this Prospective Student Weekend, I sort of meet the students in the downstairs in our student commons and give the kind of introductory talk. And during that time, what my goal is to point out certain things that I think that visitors ought to pay attention to really get a sense of what New St. Andrews is like. Since you're not here, it kind of works well for me to just wrap this up with those items. NSA is a really unique school, and there's just no getting around it. And that's why for us, a Prospective Student Weekend is so important, because when you think about going away to college, everybody has this sort of like kind of quintessential college experience that you think of in your mind. And when somebody tries to describe NSA to you, it really doesn't sound like what you think of as your sort of quintessential college. However, I think once you come here and spend a little bit of time, it starts to make a lot more sense. It's just that it's very difficult to communicate NSA in any of the sort of distance means where we show you a brochure or I come to your school and give a little talk about NSA. It's hard to really capture what we're actually doing here because we are so unique and so different. I want to take a little bit of time to walk through some of the ways that we're different and why we are deliberately choosing to pursue education from a very different kind of perspective. In one way, I actually think that what we're doing is quite consistent with what college was intended to be, but it's not that we are different, it's just that the rest of colleges have actually gone in a very different direction from the way college was originally conceived to work and to function. And so we're being deliberately principled in trying to go back and reclaim some of the traditional roles that a college was supposed to fulfill and play in the life of the student. And let me walk through what I mean by that. And one of the preliminary ways that we're so obviously just very different from most colleges is in the fact that the centerpiece of our college is this single undifferentiated degree in liberal arts and culture. All students will come and they'll all take, all the undergraduates come and walk through this one degree and they walk through it all together. Now there are electives that students can take in their sophomore, junior, and senior year. And so there is some variety that starts to creep in as you're moving along. And your senior year, you'll do your own thesis, which means you'll get to explore certain areas that you want to further pursue. But that said, the bulk of the program is this one single degree in liberal arts that everybody works through together. And that is really strange compared to most college programs. When you go to college, the first question you ask is, well, what are you studying? What's your degree? And you'll notice that degrees tend to be very vocationally oriented. And what I mean by that is that more and more we expect to see the name of a particular job reflected in the degree that you're studying. And the expectation is that well, in order to get that job, you need to you need to get this particular degree because this degree will get you that job. Um, the thing is that's really just not how the workforce actually works. Once you actually move into the workforce, you'll find that um, that that we move laterally very quickly. You'll start with a career in accounting, but you end up as a high school teacher. You start with a career in engineering, but you end up as a business administrator. Everybody tends to move laterally quite a lot. In fact, um, I forget the exact statistic, but it's around the 70% range that most of us are not working in the field that our undergraduate degree would have set us up for. My undergraduate degree was chemistry. I am working as the president of a liberal arts college. And you find that more and more people you talk to, that's the case. And that statistic is growing every year because people are spending less time in one position and moving and shifting laterally much more swiftly in the workforce right now, which means that whatever your college degree is, it's simply the entrance into your first job. And you're going to find that you move around quite a lot. For one thing, I would be surprised if the majority of you even knew what career you wanted to pursue right now. I mean, if I had trusted my 18-year-old self to try to pick the path that I would want to pursue for the rest of my life, that's kind of a scary thought. And I bet most of you are thinking, I'm not really sure. I'm still figuring myself out. So I think that the idea that your college degree is going to set you up for your career for life is really, it doesn't turn out to be true when you look at the actual workforce. What you'll find though is that colleges want you to think that that's the way it works, because for colleges, it really it really benefits colleges to give you the illusion that you are, by signing up for this set of classes, you are guaranteeing yourself this particular job. And it benefits colleges to make you think that way because most colleges are going to ask you to take out quite a lot of student loans and go into serious debt in order to get that degree. And so they can leverage that by saying, well, you'll have a return on your investment because you'll have a job as an engineer, and an engineer makes this kind of salary, and that way you can justify these loans that you're taking out. So it benefits colleges to kind of give you that impression that this degree equals that job. But the reality is, the typical degree completion rate after 6 years, 60% of incoming freshmen will have the degree, will graduate after 6 years, 60%. So 4 out of 10 of those incoming freshmen aren't even walking out with a college degree. Add on to that, now that degree completion rate goes up if you go to a stronger college. NSA has a much higher degree completion rate, but that is typical of most colleges. And then that's just to getting a degree. The likelihood of you ending with the degree that you started in is also quite a bit smaller. So you're going to start in engineering and you end up in business. And then once you go out into the world of business, you realize actually you don't really like that. You actually like marketing, and you start to move around quite a lot. All of that is to say that it behooves colleges to make you think that your degree lines up with your job. But the reality of life does not prove that out. That's actually not how it works. We believe that you're far more prepared for the workforce that we are confronted with now by having a degree that allows you to be nimble and shift. We want to, instead of focusing on one narrow set of vocational skills, we want to work more on building a broad sort of mind that's ready for any number of different kinds of careers. So rather than getting you, say, certified in one particular computer language, we would like you to teach you how to learn language in general, how to master language. Rather than teaching you how to fill out a particular sort of business form letter, we want to teach you how to be a writer in general. So, and we could go on any number of different ways that works, but basically, we believe that the liberal arts curriculum is a broad set of skills that will enable you to develop the kind of what they refer to now in the workforce as the soft skills that allow you to move into leadership positions and allow you to be ready to shift from career to career to career. So if we were to rewind the clock 25 years and I was to tell you, I can give you certification in this great, fantastic, very promising career track, and that is I can give you a bachelor's in VCR repair. Okay. And so I certify you to be able to take apart a VCR and put it back together, and you were ready for that. Well, you can all see how 5 or 6 years later, it turns out that's actually not that strategic of a position, because those kinds of technologies are constantly shifting. But if I can teach you how to be the sort of person who can be entrepreneurial, a critical thinker, a quick learner, a self-motivated worker, if I can teach you those skills, then you can hop from job to job to job as the market is constantly evolving. So that's why we pick the liberal arts curriculum. The goal is not to create liberal arts experts, and that tends to be the kind of what people think that they're doing if they sign up for a liberal arts degree. So we're not trying to, with our philosophy class, we're not trying to turn you into a PhD in philosophy who will go on to have a career in philosophy. Understand that that's actually not a career path that's going to be open to a lot of people. With our Latin class, we're not thinking that after you graduate from New St. Andrews that you will have a full-time career as a Latinist, that you will be hired by the Vatican to do translation in various church councils or something like that. We understand that that's not necessarily a career path that's going to be open as you graduate. But what we are doing with those different courses is we're teaching you how to understand language. We're teaching you how to think clearly, critically, how to be creative, how to be a clear and persuasive communicator. That's what these skills are doing. And so when you look at graduates who come out of NSA and look at what is it that they're doing now, you'll notice that they have just a really wide swath of careers that they all choose from. I know a number of our graduates who do New St. Andrews and then go on to an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, and then go into positions as finance, CFO. Some have gone into accounting. Some go from NSA into law school and then a career in law. Some would go from NSA. We have one student now who did New St. Andrews, did a 1-year post-bac certificate, and had converted that into med school. And he's in the middle of doing med school right now. You could go on to medicine, to nursing. A number go on to entrepreneurial business. It's really interesting if you look up and down Main Street here in Moscow and see the different businesses that have popped up all over, and they're just New St. Andrews grads being creative and thinking about, well, what does the workforce need right now? If you go across the street this direction, if you were standing here, I could point to it, you'll see a business called Economic Modeling Specialists Incorporated, MC. MC, currently 200 employees. They just announced that they have to grow to 500 employees over the next 3 years. They're hiring 300 people. Up till now, their favorite pipeline for employees has been New St. Andrews graduates. I think a full third of their employees are NSA grads. And they like grabbing NSA students, even though they have a bachelor's in liberal arts. They use them in sales, in marketing. Those that are really adept at the classical languages, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, they like to grab and teach them and turn them into computer programmers. In fact, their director for their computer engineering department is a New St. Andrews graduate with no other degrees, but he oversees all of their computer engineering, and he likes to grab NSA students to work in the programming there. If you go down the street this way, you'll see Canon Press as well as Guerrilla Poet. Those guys are in the middle of producing quite a few films. You may have seen the Riot and the Dance documentaries that came out, or perhaps if you go into Netflix right now, you could see Hello Ninja, an animated short series for little kids. It's fully animated cartoon that was produced by Netflix that was all conjured up by the guys about 2 blocks north of me. They're flying back and forth between LA and Canada where all the animation is done, but they're pulling NSA students in to work on a number of those projects. So you have filmmaking, you have guys doing curriculum resource, you have pastors, teachers. You go into any number of different careers really when you have a strong foundation like what we're working to give you. And I would argue that as the workforce evolves, I think it's the liberal arts degree is more timely, not less timely, because it supports a nimble mind that can move in a quickly moving and adapting workforce. So there's that. I would also just argue from a Christian perspective, I think that there's something uniquely powerful about a faithful mind that does not think of itself as trapped in one little corridor, that I know how to do these three things and this is what I do, and I need to always find a job that's in this particular skill set. I think that we're supposed to be free men and free women that are called to serve our Lord in a creative and imaginative way. We're not to be the people who are looking for one particular job so that we can take orders in that job. I think we're called to be those that are going out to fulfill the Great Commission, to subdue the earth, as we're told back in Genesis 1, and then in Matthew 28, to actually spread the gospel across the whole earth. And that requires a bold, creative, leading mindset, which I think is uniquely the fruit of that liberal arts education. So that's one of the reasons why it's probably the big reason why we are a liberal arts college. We're not thinking that we're producing career philosophers. We think that we're producing imaginative, creative, entrepreneurial workers who can go in any number of different directions. And that's why we're using the liberal arts curriculum in that way. Actually, a couple other things just about the academic program. I know I think I said this in the lordship class for a few of you that were sitting in on that. I would just emphasize that it's a rigorous program. We are distinct from most colleges in the fact that if you come here, you are going to be taught how to work hard with your mind. I know as a young man, this is the one thing that I think I really could have used. Self-discipline, particularly the ability to sit down and study. That was not something that came naturally to me. And I needed an education that would teach me the glory of sweating with your brain, of working hard and being disciplined and focused. And it's not about, again, that one particular subject. It's about, for instance, I did chemistry, but to this day, I now preach really regularly. And if I go back to my undergrad years and that moment in an upper level chemistry class when I had to sit and work on a chemistry problem that took multiple days and multiple pages to work through to get it right, that discipline of just focusing on one question until you got it right, even though you were doing it wrong and bouncing your head off the brick wall again and again, and then finally getting to the end where you got it right, that discipline is something I needed in sermon prep, where I need to not be lazy. I need to actually apply to this, all of my mind, and I need to work on it until I get it right. That was a discipline I needed for writing a doctoral dissertation at Oxford. There's a kind of mental discipline that you need in order to be a faithful Christian thinker. And that's something that we really, really do concentrate on making sure that we give you. You will be taught to work hard with your mind. And this is the statistic that I used earlier in the Lordship lecture, but I think it bears repeating that in 1961, the typical college student was working 40 hours a week, 12 hours a week in class, and then 28 hours a week doing the study that it was required to be ready for those 12 hours a week in class. 2011 and 2015, the typical college student was working 17 and a half hours per week. Subtract out the 12 hours in class, that means that they're working 5.5 hours a week studying for those 12 hours of class. From 28 hours a week to 5.5 hours a week. College has gotten just easier. And over that same period of time, in 1960, typical student or the typical class, 15% of those students got A's. Currently, 45% of those students get A's. The A is the most commonly given out grade on college campuses now. So even though they are working a fraction of what their predecessors were working, they are 3 times more likely to get A's now. College has just become more and more of a joke. And I think it's really interesting this time where all colleges are having to go online. I think what we'll find is that most college students are going to say, you know what, the online version was just as good, if not better, than the in-person version. I don't know if that's quite the case with NSA. I think our students actually really appreciate what's happening here on location. But I think in general, colleges are not delivering the kind of rigor that they gave 50, 60 years ago. NSA, we really work to make sure that we're keeping that level of rigor the same. So we do annual surveys from students to see how hard, how many hours it takes for them to get their NSA work done. We're still back in that 1960 average, right? We are going to teach you to be a diligent worker. You'll learn that while you're here. You won't graduate without that. And I think it's just important to say that because this is not the school where you're going to go to and put in minimal effort and party like crazy. That's not what's going to happen here. You're going to learn to be a real student while you're here. I should just point out typical schedule, just so you could get a sense of what the rhythms are like while you're at NSA. We're broken down into 4 quarters, 4 8-week quarters, and with Christmas in between. Each of those 8-week quarters, you have 8 weeks. The 8th week is a week of finals, and the 7 weeks leading up to it are 7 weeks of courses. You joined us for week 2 of our 4th term. The way a typical week will work is most courses will begin with something like a 1 or 2 hour lecture at the beginning of the week with some sort of an introduction to a question and an assignment that you're going to prepare for. So you're going to leave that lecture. You're going to go out and you're going to have a bunch of reading you need to do. You're going to have an essay that you need to write. You're going to have to prepare something. And at the end of the week, you're going to go back and it's going to be a small group recitation with the same instructor, not a TA. You're going to have the same instructor and in a small group where you're now going to try to answer that question that your instructor gave to you. And you're going to argue with him and he's going to push back and he's going to help you see how you didn't really think of this and you didn't prepare this very well. And it's going to sharpen you each time as you get better and better. That really is what we do 7 weeks in a row. And then the 8th week, you're going to come in for finals. And frequently those finals are a one-on-one oral final. It's just you going into your instructor's office and your instructor beginning to question you and to see how well you mastered the material that he gave you. And you'll find that those can be pretty intense. I think it can be unnerving your first year, and it can be kind of emotional for some people to be at this place where somebody is walking through and kind of taking apart your answer. But what you'll find is when you do that for 4 years, by the time you finish 4 years here, and you go to a job and somebody tells you, listen, I need you to go figure out that. Figure it out. Google is your friend. I can't hold your hand. Come up with the answer and come back. When you come back, be right and be ready for me to cross-examine you. When you experience that in the workforce, you will say, this is just what I was made to do. This is how I have been trained to behave. It's why an NSA grad makes a great entrepreneurial businessman, a lawyer, a CFO, because that kind of intellectual preparation and then being ready to come and argue with someone and make your case is something that you've been well prepared to do. We had one graduate who's an attorney in Illinois now, and he was mentioning that he ended up having to argue a case before the Illinois State Supreme Court. And somebody was asking him, look, wasn't that just terrifying? And he said, if you had an oral final with Nate Wilson, this is nothing, all right? I was totally ready. And that's the kind of confidence we want to graduate you with, the ability to go out and tackle the world with that kind of competency. A couple other elements about how NSA is unique. You maybe have picked up on the fact that we come at the college budget in a very different sort of way than most other colleges. One of the most significant ones being that we don't take any of the federal money. So no Pell Grants, no government loans, the government subsidized student loans, which means that our graduates graduate on average with 0 debt, as opposed to the 30-some thousand that your typical student is graduating with right now. When you graduate from NSA, we'd like to see you graduate with no debt. But in order to make that possible, though, we really have to work to keep our tuition as low as possible. Typical private Christian liberal arts college, your annual tuition, this is without room and board, just tuition, is going to be in the mid $30,000, $35,000, $36,000 annually. A New St. Andrews, we're going to be in the mid $13,000. All right, so we really work to cut that price way down. Now, there's a couple of ways that happens. First of all, there's an optical illusion that you really all ought to be aware of. If you're applying to other colleges right now, I just want to make you aware of this so you understand how this works. Typical college will, their tuition is going to be 36,000. You will apply and you'll say, but there's no way I could afford that. And you ask for a scholarship. On average, most of them are going to give you at least a 50 to 60% scholarship to cover your tuition. Okay. And when you get that award letter, you'll think, wow, that's amazing. I was accepted to this really exclusive college. And I know it was exclusive because it cost $37,000 annually. And yet they really want me. And I know they really want me because they just offered me $18,000 in scholarship in order to go there. And that just feels so incredible because they're giving you $18,000. You need to understand that that $18,000 doesn't exist. There's not a scholarship fund where they're granting you that $18,000 from. They're doing what's called discounting. And all of the private Christian liberal arts colleges are doing this. They charge $36,000, $37,000, but they understand that they're going to take $20,000 off as a discount, and they call that a scholarship that they send to you. They already know that the actual price of tuition is $16,000 to $18,000. Whatever you get in the award is just their discounted scholarship, and it's a way to. And I've spoken to other colleges where they say, yeah, we set our tuition really high because it signals equality, exclusivity, whatever. It makes people feel a certain way. And then we give them all this scholarship to knock it back down. So you need to know that that's in there. And then what they'll do is, so now your tuition is 17,000, and they're going to count on you taking out a student loan for 15,000. Your parents will contribute a little, you'll get a Pell Grant, whatever. And that way you can make it through what feels like this really exclusive college experience. You'll graduate with $45,000 in student loan debt or something like that. But you feel like, well, it was worth it because it was such an expensive school and they gave me this great scholarship. So that's how people tend to justify it. So anyhow, just know that those numbers are not what's actually going on. The New St. Andrews, we're not going to play that game with you. We're not going to try to get your student loans jacked up or something like that. We work to keep it affordable, 13,000 and some change for tuition. Now, in that number, you need to understand we're not going to spend a bunch of our money on a whole bunch of campus bling, in order to attract students, because that's what most of the colleges are doing. They're jacking tuition way up so they can finance massive building projects, but the building projects tend to be more like the rec center, the climbing wall, the swim center, all of these things that kind of make the school attractive to you, but they do it in a not very efficient way. For kicks, one time I was trying to figure out, like, if we wanted to come up with the NSA sort of platinum package, like if we on NSA tuition plus all of the amenities that a college student could ever possibly dream of. I put together the NSA Platinum package that involved, all your season passes at the ski resort, flying you to every Seahawks game to watch the football and the NBA games, and on and on and on and on. And for about 20,000 annually, you could have an amazing amenities package. And if you took the NSA tuition, 13,000, and put this amenities package on 33,000, you could have this degree plus every possible pastime that you could ever want to pursue. The thing is it's just a joke. I mean, it really is a joke, because you can't pursue that kind of life of leisure if you're a serious college student. That's why students are not working 40 hours a week and instead are working this little small fraction of it, because so much of it is about the time in the gym and the time in the all the different things that are going on. We're not going to indulge in that. What our goal is to give you a serious college education, and so that means our facilities are building. We have a building with classrooms where you come in. There's a library, and you have teachers who are going to challenge you. College here is college. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a social life. There is a huge social life. It's just that we as a college don't feel like it's our job to sort of craft your social life for you. Now, and one of the things you'll find out is when you pursue it on your own, you'll find you can do it for far cheaper than if you ask us to craft all of your life of leisure and spend your student loans on it. Anyhow, Moscow is a really interesting town. We are a town of in the low 20,000s, and we have the University of Idaho, just right that direction, with about 8,000 students here, and then Washington State University about 5 or 6 miles that way with another 20,000 students here. So you've got close to 30,000 college students in these two little towns. And so even though we're like a little town up in North Idaho, people are scared that, like, what will there be to do? You just throw potatoes at one another or something like that. Actually, this is your quintessential college town. There's quite a lot going on at all times, and it's all put together in order to basically serve the college student. This town is made for the college student. So New St. Andrews, we're right on Main Street. We're at this corner of Main and what's called Friendship Square, which Friendship Square is essentially the very heart of downtown Moscow. And then, so all the businesses, coffee shops, restaurants, hamburger joints, all of that is just kind of right here. And we sit right at the very center of that. And then it moves out. And as you go into like the subdivisions and whatnot, you'll find that you have quite a lot of the housing in this direction is all really geared towards renting to college students. So most of our students will end up with a rental of some sort like this, or they'll end up boarding with one of the families from one of the local churches. But they tend to live really within walking distance of downtown Moscow. And I would urge you, if you're looking to get an apartment, you want to aim for something that has that is walking distance. If you want to live further out, you can, if you're going to bring a car. And we do have a private NSA lot over here that you can park in. So you can have parking and a car, but it's a really fun town to just be on foot in. It's really made for that. And because everybody's pretty close and it's a very tight town, the social life is actually quite extensive. I would say, if anything, our students have far too much of a social life. I'm always telling them, like, quit all of your parties, you should go study or something like that. But there's always something going on. I have 3 kids who are undergrads right now, and so I'm seeing sort of firsthand all of their constant study group, which is actually them going to goof off and have fun with each other. There's quite a lot of the social life, and it's just that it's not, we as a college don't feel like we have to provide the facility for you to do that in. It's the Bootzer's, you may have heard of, is the college or is a coffee shop about 2 or 3 blocks that way that is kind of the unofficial New St. Andrews hangout. But you have, just so many places up and down. Humble Burger, started by a couple of NSA grads, probably the best hamburger in town, 2 or 3 blocks that way. That's kind of a common hangout with bands playing over the weekends. Bootzer's usually has bands on the weekends as well. You have Tapped, who's a great restaurant down here. It goes kind of on and on, all of the places that people are hanging out, as well as in their apartments and parties there. Because our student body works through the degree as a group, so as freshmen, they all take the same classes, and then there's some varieties they move up, but they still work as a cohort through. That creates kind of a cohesion within the group that tends to be this sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like there's, never leave a man behind. That kind of, that instinct gets built in the class, and the class tends to help one another, make sure that they're all invited to the study groups, make sure that they're ready for their next recitation. And that's one of the reasons why I think we have a really strong degree completion rate as these students move through. Let's see. I'm trying to go through my list of all the things I was going to mention. So we don't do dorms. You're expected to go get your own apartment. And honestly, I really think that is a big part of the NSA experience, that you're not going to come here and be sequestered off in this little group of college students where your only friends are 1 year older than you and 1 year younger than you, and that's kind of your world. When I first did my undergrad, I was at the University of Idaho on the campus over there, and I think probably for the first 3 years, I don't think I hardly even left campus. So, my sole conception of the world was just other college students. We want you to actually be in real life. So for instance, one of the biggest things is when you go to church, you're going to go to a real church with people who are elderly, little kids who are crying and screaming. We want you to not be divorced from real life. You're going to get your own apartment. You're going to have to figure out your own internet. You're going to cook for yourself. You're going to clean for yourself. You're going to do your own laundry. You're going to pay your bills. You're going to be in charge of setting the agenda for your life. And I think that that's really important, because one of the things that, the accusation that's kind of constantly leveled against the generation that's right in front of you, the sort of millennial mindset, is this idea of, you've got all of these people who have the failure to launch problem, that they can't figure out how to go out and actually grow up and be adults. I think honestly, our college campuses are a big reason for that, where we are putting them in this little imaginary city where you're living on imaginary money, your student loans, and you just go to the cafeteria for your food, and you go to your dorm, and everything is kind of taken care of for you. And then when you graduate from that, you're not actually ready to go out and live like a real adult. When you come to NSA, from the moment that you matriculate, you need to understand that we're going to treat you as an adult. We really think of you as an adult. You're a competent decision maker who will take responsibility for your life. And what you find is that when you live like that through your college years, when you graduate, the ability to launch, to go on, to get a job, to get married, to figure out what you're going to do with your life, to plug yourself into a church, that becomes far easier when you've been living like that for the 4 years you're in college. And so we don't have a problem with NSA grads not getting work. We don't have an unemployment rate after students graduate. They all get jobs because, well, what else would you do when you graduate from college? You go out and you get a job. We have a very high rate of students who are graduating and moving on to get married, who are becoming productive parts of their, members of their church, because they understand that this is just how you're supposed to live. It's because that's how we were treating them while they were students here. So that no dorms thing is actually kind of like a really important thing to us. The probably the most significant element of the Moscow community really is the very vibrant church community. There are a number of really solid churches in the area that our students are all plugged in with, and take leadership roles within the church in terms of serving and helping and being productive members of the congregations. We really see NSA as an important part of our church community. And I would say, if you ask a typical NSA grad, what was the most important thing about New St. Andrews? They will universally tell you it wasn't the college, it was the community. It's this vibrant community of Christian believers who are setting examples for you on what it looks like to get married, what it looks like to raise children, what it looks like to get a job, what it looks like to confess your sins, what it looks like to confront somebody else to confess their sins. Learning what it looks like to live your life out as a mature Christian adult is being modeled all around you, and you really get a rare, chance to be discipled by a community. And I know as I speak to our alumni that that's the thing that really made such an impact on them. I really love talking to grads from 15 years ago, and they're still describing how their marriage is shaped by their time at NSA. And it wasn't a lecture or a recitation. It was just seeing it lived out in front of them in the church community. So that's a really, really big and important part of it. The last thing, and I know this came up in the lordship conversation as well, but I think it's worth just mentioning here. When you come here, you'll notice that people would think this small little college in North Idaho is probably just all people that live, within 12 miles of Moscow. In actuality, I think it's less than 30% of our students are from Washington, Idaho, and Oregon combined. Our student body is pretty diverse, and just from looking at the poll that Grace did at the beginning, this prospective student weekend seems to be pretty representative of the kind of student body that we have. It's a pretty even spread across the U.S. as well as internationally, and that's what our student body looks like. But that means that most of our students travel a great distance in order to come here. And that's something that I think is a big hurdle for a lot of people to get over. It feels like going to North Idaho, you've got to just go on a wagon train for 3 or 4 weeks in order to get all the way there. but it's actually pretty easy to get to. You can fly into Spokane. I fly all around every week. Well, not these weeks, but once the airlines are back to normal, I'm almost every single week I'm flying somewhere, and it's actually pretty easy to get to Moscow. It just means that you're going to spend a little bit on airfare, or you're going to drive for a while in order to get here. If you're paying for airfare, I think that easily what you're saving by coming to NSA in tuition can cover all of your airfare in visits home. Or if you're going to need to drive, then yeah, it's a commitment. You need to take a day or two to get on the road and get out here. But I do think it's worth it. And this is the thing. I know that, particularly as a parent, how it feels a little bit terrifying to think, that's so far away. It's so far away. And I know that that is true for a lot of people, although it's not that hard to get here if you want to come and see your kids. But what I have seen is a lot of parents saying, look, it's so far away. I would rather, I like everything that you're doing up there, but if they go to this community college right next to me, then they'll be close and I can be there for them. But what they find is the state college, the community college, whatever, they put their kid in the college, and by the end of the 4 years there, their kid has been turned into a different kind of person, because the secular college system is so hostile to the faith. And what you find is after 4 years, yes, they're geographically right next to you, but in terms of their worldview, they're light years away, because that school is going in a very different direction. Yes, we're a long ways in terms of miles, but I think that what I have seen is that you know I've cited the statistics before, but less than 2% of our grads after 15 years have been divorced. So our divorce rate is less than 2% after 15 years, and it's the same for those that have left the church. A less than 2% average. So 98% of our grads 15 years later are still attending a Christian church, are not divorced. In other words, they're still on the path that their parents wanted for them. So yes, we're far away geographically, but I think that we're the closest thing that you're going to find in terms of a sustained Christian faithfulness to the worldview that you'd like to see your kids growing up in. And I think that distance is a far more critical distance to consider. I love seeing these churches spread out throughout the U.S. where you get a couple kids coming from that church, come to NSA, and then return to that church. And then you start to get this pipeline of kids going back to that church from NSA. And you have this far greater lifelong faithfulness in that congregation because of the 4 years that they were spending here. I think that that's a really cool phenomenon, and I'm seeing it in a few places. Anyhow, I think that hits all the points that I wanted to make. So I think I'm going to hand this back to Grace now, or maybe it's to Jacob to see, you wanted to quarterback the Q&A session then?
Yeah, Jacob, do you want to quarterback the Q&A?
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Merkle, so much for that. We've had a ton of questions, a lot of feedback, so we'll do our best to hit the big one. And what I'll probably do is I'll save some of the more student life community ones for in just a little bit. I'd encourage you all to come back at 3:30 for a panel we're having with faculty members, students, alumni, and hopefully that'll help you get a better sense of the more community aspects of the college. So I had somebody who had a question right at the beginning, Dr. Merkle, and you explained this a little bit, but what was it that originally sort of sparked the idea of NSA to go a different direction than most college institutions? Is there a moment, or is there an idea or a problem that you would say?
Yeah. So I think that the real spark for it really goes back to probably 1980 and the launch of Logos School. So Doug Wilson started Logos School with this idea of kind of performing this experiment that Dorothy Sayers proposed in The Lost Tools of Learning. And that became a book in 1990, Recovering Lost Tools of Learning. And then that book turned into a movement of classical Christian education. And so now you've got kids in ACCS schools, Association of Classical Christian Schools, or SCL, Society for Classical Learning, kind of all across the US. And then you probably got 4 or 5 times that number of kids in one form or another of homeschooling that's based off of that original classical model, classical conversations, or Veritas Online, or Logos Online. You got all of these different folks, but all of them are really basically trying to recover the very different kind of educating. And what we realized was basically when you've completed that, here's the bad news for you. Those of you that have been receiving a classical Christian education, the bad news is you've been ruined for college. You have. You've been ruined. And what I mean by that is when you walk into your freshman year at your typical college, you're going to look around and you're going to say, what is this? I mean, this is the level of academic challenge that's being provided there is so minimal. I described that level of work that it takes to get through a typical college there. Well, that's because it is they're having to downgrade so much of their expectations. If you've gotten a solid K-12 education, you're going to discover that there isn't a college that pushes you the way you've been taught to work. And so what we really wanted to do was to create what would be the next step for somebody who has that kind of education. And there are a lot of principial decisions that were made in that K-12 education that we've wanted that have some sort of corresponding element in the undergrad that we're providing right now. So we're taking a lot of people, this is a side note, but a lot of the objection or the concern that I've heard has been, well, if I've already received a classical Christian education K-12, then I've already done classical ed. Why do I need to go to a place like NSA?
Right.
My would be NSA is the only college that's actually like fitting for your next step. You're going to find that most of the schools you go to, you're going to go in, you're going to say, I just am coasting now. This is your freshman classes are going to be below your junior and senior and high school level classes. So anyhow, it really is the whole launch of that movement that we want to live within and be that next step for a student who's received an education like that.
That's really great. So it sounds like you're saying part of one of the initial directions was taking that classical foundation that a lot of these students, first-gen students, have received, and saying, okay, what do we do now? How do we level up? How do we take it to the next level?
Exactly. And I think you can't if a student hasn't been taught the way a lot of the classical Christian schools are teaching, NSA could be really hard. I think we're a great next step for students who have that kind of education. And if you have that kind of education, you're going to find yourself really sort of disillusioned when you go to most colleges next.
Great. So could you talk a little bit about, so you talked a lot about the generalist sort of approach of the undergrad. Why 3 years of languages then? That sounds suspiciously like a minor. Could you maybe talk about why we do that? And
yeah, so classical language, learning classical language has always been a really key ingredient in the liberal arts curriculum. Particularly starting with Latin. Latin is really useful just because Latin is hyper precise in its syntax. So the way the verb and the nouns work, it's quite specific. So to contrast that with something like Hebrew, in Hebrew, a particular verb tense means the future, kind of, maybe, except if it doesn't, and you just kind of have to feel, you have to get a sense of the feel for it. Whereas in Latin, it's quite precise. What that does with Latin, when you start there, is it teaches you not just to understand Latin, but it starts to teach you how to be much more precise with English. You start to think in this much more precise sort of way. And that has an effect, not just in how you speak or write, but it has an effect on how you think. You actually, in a much more precise way, because your words are, it's kind of like, imagine, I do a lot of home remodeling on my house. So if I'm not here, I'm at home, doing some sort of project in my house. And imagine sheetrocking with a tape measure that has just 1-inch increments. And then imagine sheetrocking with something that has 1/4-inch increments, and then do it with, say, 1/16-inch increments.
Sure.
When you're just working with the large increments, you're going to always necessarily be sloppy. The more precise you're able to divide things, the more precise you're able to be about the subject that you're thinking about and discussing. Precision in language leads to precision in thinking. And this is just, there's just so much evidence for this. So we tend to start with something like Latin to teach you to think precisely about how language works. But we want you to not just get that introductory experience, because here's the problem, and I see this in a lot of the classical schools, and this is a little bit of a critique maybe of some of the classical,
Yeah.
but what tends to happen if you're taking a K-12 classical education, what tends to happen is you were subjected to Latin study, and usually what that means is you didn't learn Latin. It means you learned how to do Latin exercises. In other words, you've spent 6 years doing Latin exercises, but you still couldn't read a page of Latin to save your life. You don't know how the language works. There's a leap that needs to be made where you're not just learning how to do Latin exercises, but you're learning how to actually just read the text. And when you make the leap to being able to be fluent in a language where you actually can just pick it up and read, it's hard to explain what that does to your mind. And it's not just that you're able to read this text now, you start to think in a very, very different kind of way. And so our goal is to get our students to actually be able to be fluent in a language, to be able to get to the point where they can just pick up a text and read, and then suddenly like be transported to this place that was not just thousands of miles away, but it was thousands of years away, and be able to start thinking, wrap your mind around what it would have meant to have received this text in its present day. It opens your mind up. It just really does, and it has a profound effect on the way you think, the way you understand things, and the way your own imagination starts to work. So it is pretty important to us to make sure that every one of our graduate gets to that level. So that's why we require 3 years, and we offer a range, Latin, Greek, and Biblical Hebrew, so that you've got some diversity and you can go in any number of different directions.
Great. That's really helpful. Could you maybe compare a bit, because there are a handful of colleges that are trying to do a similar thing in terms of providing a classical or Christian undergraduate education, liberal arts schools. How would you compare and contrast? I mean, you've got a couple of, Hillsdale, New Franklin. Is there something that how would you sort of compare New St. Andrews in terms of their curriculum or maybe their mission or method?
Yeah. So to be clear, New St. Andrews is not the only ones that are doing what we're doing. We're just the best.
Point take.
Seriously, so I can think of a number of colleges that are doing something very similar to what NSA is doing. So you have Grove City and Hillsdale both really serious about not taking federal money in the same way that New St. Andrews is not. You have New College Franklin or Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis, who are working to put together this sort of liberal arts kind of cohesive curriculum in the way that we're doing. And I think that it's all fantastic. I'm really excited to see Patrick Henry in Virginia they're doing majors, so it's different than ours, but they're not taking money, pretty distinctive in their Christian worldview. So there are a number of these other schools that are doing it, and I just hope that there are more and more of them, and that they can get better and better. But that all said, I'm serious about the fact that we are the best. It's just, we are, and what I mean by that is, and we have long ways to go. I know that we have so much progress that we still need to make as a school, but a lot of the schools that you're describing are all schools that are stepping in to become successors to that classical Christian education movement. New College Franklin, Bethlehem College and Seminary, Patrick Henry, all were formed and started after that movement began as a way of riding on it. Not true of Bethlehem College and Seminary. They started as a seminary and then dropped down. But that package that I'm describing, they're coming along, they're seeing this sort of pipeline of students coming out of the classical Christian movement, and they're coming up with programs to fill that need. Hillsdale and Grove City existed long before, but they're sort of rebranding and pivoting to sort of step into this position. New St. Andrews was started at the heart of where the classical Christian movement began. And it began with those principles built into the college at the very beginning. New St. Andrews continues to be at the very center of a lot of the pedagogical innovation that is the classical movement. And I think that I see what we're doing, I see other schools doing it, and coming online and picking it up. And I think that's awesome. But what I don't see is one school that is doing all of it the way New St. Andrews is. So basically, we are the original. We're the first ones, and we're the ones that are still the ones that are most consistently and performing at the highest level, putting it all together. And I don't mean that in any way as a slam against any one of those other schools. I highly recommend them. I really do. I think that what they're doing is great. But if you want what I was just describing, NSA is a place where you're going to see all of that come together.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Grace. How are we doing on time? What do you think? What do you think we?
Yeah, I think
gotcha.
one final comment from Dr. Merkle, and then we're going to break here and see you all in a different link for our roundtable discussion with students, faculty, and alum. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Merkle, and if you want to say a last word here.
Yeah, thanks very much. And it is a shame that we can't have you all here in person. I hope that all the work that the recruitment staff have done to put this online gives you some taste, but we would really love to have you out here in the summer. And one of the things I encourage, if you are not a senior, if you're underclass, below senior, check out the CALD conference. That's a really great way to end up actually visiting Moscow over the summer and giving a little bit of a taste for Moscow, Idaho. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Merkle. All right. Grace, I think you're muted.
Thanks. You got my back. You got
That's
my back.
Right.
We will see you all in our other webinar, and you can find that link in your email.